All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something. Um,
Well, it's something that a lot of people might consider a little bit out there, not exactly everyday conversation material. We're talking about adult baby diaper lovers, or ABDL. Now, you requested this deep dive, and to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect at first. But you sent over a whole stack of sources, personal stories, medical reports even, like practical guides, almost like how-to manuals.
it's a whole world, really, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're getting a glimpse into a subculture that most people don't even know exists.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you see talked about on mainstream media. And to be honest, when I first started reading through these sources, I was kind of like, whoa, this is a lot to unpack. But the more I dug in, the more I realized how much there is to learn.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that struck me is how much this topic touches on so many different aspects of the human experience. You've got psychology, social dynamics, even healthcare. Yeah, like one of the sources you sent over, it was this medical document on forced retention of bodily waste. And at first I was like, okay, how does this connect to ABDL? But then you explained it to me and it was like, oh, wow, that actually makes sense.
It's all about understanding the potential long-term effects of certain childhood experiences and how those experiences might play a role in shaping someone's preferences later in life.
So like you're saying that something like potty training, how that goes.
Yeah, potty training, or even just the way a child's relationship with their bodily functions develops, it can have a really significant impact on them down the line.
That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is, and it really highlights the need to approach this topic with sensitivity. We're not here to judge or to make assumptions about people's motivations.
Right, we're here to understand.
Exactly, and to learn and maybe even challenge some of our own preconceived notions about what's considered normal.
Because let's be real, the whole idea of adults choosing to wear diapers,
Right.
well, it's not exactly something you see every day. And I think for a lot of people, it's probably something that's hard to grasp. Like, why would someone want to do that?
It's definitely a topic that can make people uncomfortable, and I think a lot of that discomfort comes from a lack of understanding.
Yeah, and that lack of understanding can lead to some pretty serious stigma. Which brings us to one of the most powerful sources you sent over, the story of Damien Turner. It's this article from the Irish Mirror, and it really gives you a glimpse into his life. He was a 28-year-old ABDL from West Virginia, and he was very open about his lifestyle, describing it as a source of comfort and security.
And he's not alone in that feeling. A lot of people within the ABDL community talk about the sense of peace and relaxation that they get from wearing diapers. It's like it fulfills a certain need for them, whether it's emotional, psychological, or even physical.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's important to understand, that the motivations behind ABDL can be really diverse and personal, and that it's not always about being infantile or regressing to childhood.
Exactly. It's about finding something that works for you, that brings you comfort, and that helps you cope with the stresses of life.
Unfortunately for Damien, embracing his ADDL lifestyle came at a cost. He faced a lot of negativity from people who didn't understand or accept him. He struggled to find employment, he got fired from jobs. It seems like that constant rejection really took a toll on him.
And that's the heartbreaking reality for a lot of people who live outside of societal norms. They're constantly facing judgment, discrimination, and even outright hostility.
Yeah, and in Damien's case, it ended tragically. He took his own life, and while we can't know for sure, it seems very likely that the pressure and the judgment he faced played a role in his decision.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of stigma and discrimination. And it really underscores the need for empathy and understanding, even when we're confronted with something that we might not personally understand or agree with.
It's a heavy lesson, but it's one that we need to keep in mind as we continue our deep dive
Yeah.
into this complex and multifaceted world of ABDL.
It's kind of like, even though there's all this negativity and judgment surrounding ABDL, there's also this really strong sense of community and shared experience, people coming together to support each other, to share information and resources, to create a space where they can feel accepted and understood.
Yeah, and that really comes across in these sources. Like there's a lot of practical advice, tips and tricks for navigating the ABDL lifestyle, stuff that you wouldn't really find anywhere else.
It's almost like a hidden world with its own set of rules and practices.
Right, like who knew there was a whole science to reducing diaper odor?
Oh yeah, there are all sorts of techniques and products out there, scented sprays, special laundry detergents, even diets designed to produce a certain type of bowel movement.
Okay, now that one really threw me for a loop. I mean, I get the whole discretion thing, but a specific diet to control, it just seems like a lot of effort.
But I think that speaks to the level of dedication within the ABDL community. They're not just passively engaging in this lifestyle, they're actively seeking out ways to make it work for them, to make it as safe, hygienic, and comfortable as possible.
So it's about more than just wearing a diaper. It's about creating a whole experience, a way of life.
Exactly. And it's about doing it in a way that minimizes the risk of judgment or stigma.
Which is why there's so much emphasis on discretion.
Mm.
A lot of the advice is geared towards keeping the ABDL aspect of their lives private.
That's understandable given the societal pressures they face.
Yeah, it's like they're constantly having to weigh their desire for self-expression
Mm.
against the fear of being outed or ridiculed.
It's a tough balance to strike, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical tips, the discretion, but there's one more thing I got to ask about. This whole unpotty training thing.
Ah, yes, that one. It's definitely one of the more controversial aspects of ABDL.
It just seems so counterintuitive. Like, we spend years potty training kids,
Yeah.
and some adults are intentionally trying to reverse that process.
It's about embracing the infantile aspects of the lifestyle. For some people, it's about reconnecting with a time when they felt safe, secure, and cared for.
One of the sources actually had this whole guide on unpotty training. It pretty intense, like drinking tons of fluids to weaken bladder control, visualizing yourself having accidents, even pretending to be asleep while wetting the bed.
It's almost like a form of psychological conditioning, retraining your mind and body to accept incontinence as a normal and even desirable state.
It's wild. I mean, it makes you realize how much of what we consider normal is just learned behavior.
Exactly. We're all products of our upbringing and our culture.
And I guess what's considered normal in one context might be totally different in another.
That's the beauty of exploring different subcultures. It challenges our assumptions and forces us to broaden our perspectives.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here,
Mm.
but there's one more term that I keep seeing in these sources that I think we need to address: diaper addiction.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think the term itself can be really misleading and even harmful.
Because it implies that everyone who enjoys wearing diapers is somehow addicted, when in reality, the motivations and experiences within the ABDL community are really diverse.
And it's important to remember that for some people, diapers are a medical necessity. They might have incontinence issues or other health conditions that require them to wear diapers.
So using the term addiction in those cases would be totally inappropriate.
Exactly. And even for those who experience a strong psychological attachment to diapers, it's not always accurate or helpful to label it as an addiction.
Right, because addiction implies a lack of control, a compulsive need that's causing harm.
And that's not always the case with ABDL.
So we need to be really careful about how we use that term and avoid making generalizations about an entire community based on a label that might not fit everyone.
Agreed. And if someone is struggling with their diaper use, if it's causing them distress or interfering with their life, then seeking professional help is always a good idea.
Absolutely. There are therapists who specialize in these types of issues, and they can provide support and guidance without judgment.
It's all about finding a healthy balance and making sure that your choices are aligned with your well-being.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical, the psychological, even the controversial aspects of ABDL. And it's clear that this is a complex world with a lot of layers.
It's a world of contradictions, where personal expression meets societal stigma, where practical solutions coexist with deep-seated psychological needs.
It challenges our assumptions about what's normal and what's not.
And it forces us to confront our own biases and preconceived notions.
Ultimately, I think this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's shown me that there's so much more to this world than I ever realized.
And I think it's also raised some important questions about how we as a society approach those who are different from us, how we can create a more inclusive and understanding world for everyone.
I'm really starting to see how this whole ABDL thing, it's not just about diapers, is it?
Not at all. It's about so much more than that. It's about identity, about finding a community where you feel accepted.
Yeah, like we were saying before, it's about challenging those societal norms.
Those unspoken rules about what's considered normal and what's not.
And for people who don't fit into those neat little boxes, well, life can be pretty tough.
Especially when you're dealing with something as personal and often misunderstood as ABDL.
Yeah, Damien's story really brought that home for me. The way he was treated, the judgment he faced.
It's a tragic reminder of the harm that stigma and discrimination can cause.
So what can we do? Like, how do we create a society that's more accepting, more understanding, not just for ABDL folks, but for everyone who feels like they're on the outside.
It starts with conversations like this one. It's about being willing to learn, to listen, to challenge our own biases.
To recognize that just because something is different, it doesn't mean it's wrong or bad.
Exactly. And I think it's also about recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all, regardless of our differences.
That's a really powerful thought. We might not always understand each other's choices or lifestyles, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find our way in the world.
Trying to find a place where we belong, where we feel safe and accepted.
And maybe, just maybe, by having these tough conversations, by shining a light on those things that make us uncomfortable, we can start to build a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's about embracing diversity, about celebrating our differences, and recognizing that those differences are what make life so rich and interesting.
Well said. So, to everyone listening out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey, that's for sure.
And I hope it's left you with some food for thought.
We've explored some pretty complex and challenging ideas today, but I think the takeaway is ultimately a positive one.
It's about the power of empathy, the importance of understanding.
And the hope that we can create a world where everyone feels free to be themselves, without fear of judgment or discrimination.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep the conversation going.
And remember, even when faced with something you don't understand, approach it with an open mind and a willingness to learn. You might just be surprised by what you discover. Thanks for listening.